Welcome back to Digital Perspectives, everybody. I'm Brad Kimes, and you can follow me on Twitter at BackupBradley at the top of the screen. And everything that we're talking about here, what does the screen say? NESARA. Yeah, National Economic Security and Recovery Act. And I want to tell you, we're going to talk a little bit about this. Now, we know NESARA, GESARA has been a topic amongst people in the space and following the economy and crypto. Excuse me. And I want to just let everybody know NESARA is the National Economic Security and Recovery Act. GESARA is basically the global version of that. And what it basically talks about is many things, but large part is dismissing of the debt, right? A cancellation of the debt, whether it be a national or global effort. What I can tell you right now is we're going to look at some information and letters from the World Bank. We're going to look at some letters from faith leaders across the world who work directly with the G20. And why faith leaders? Because faith leaders, where ministries are around the world, no matter what the faith is, they deal with the poorest and poorest of people. They know what's happening, boots on the ground. So that is actually an important reflection letter of what is taking place around the globe. Excuse me. Allergies this morning. Okay, so with that being said, we're also going to look at some information from the G20. Shout out to Michael C. for all the things that he sent me. And shout out to all the researchers and influencers in this community. We are really, truly lucky. One more time, beware of scams, guys. Beware of scams. I'm well aware that there are ads in front of all the crypto YouTubers of scam ads. I can do nothing about it. YouTube is allowing the scammers to pay them, and they are placing the ads. Please do not suggest to me that I stop advertising or monetizing my channel, because I would never suggest that Ripple stop selling XRP because they're scammers. They're scammers every day in life, and none of us should stop making money because there's other people doing harmful things. The world would cease to exist. So, but what we can do is we can work together collectively as a community, if you will, and we can keep each other informed about what's going on. And if we stay informed, we won't take the hook. Right? And then the other thing is that we can do is we can politely tag YouTube and ask them to be responsible and stop taking money from the scammers themselves. That's my public service announcement for the morning. Let's go ahead and get into this thing. Okay, so now let's start here. Okay, let's start here. Shout out to XRP Crypto Wolf. World Bank President David Malpass talked about the following global topics for today's virtual G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meeting: debt reduction, debt suspension, debt transparency, debt resolution mechanisms. Let's take a look at some of this stuff. This stuff is important, guys, and I'm going to tell you why. Because we know that there was a liquidity crisis before the pandemic hit the planet. We knew that. Cryptopolis and myself have been reporting on it extensively. There was a shortage of capital flow. People were running out of funds. Well, let's take a look at just some of the bullet points here. Debt suspension. I urge you to extend the time frame of debt service suspension initiative, the DSSI, which I covered with you, I believe last week. We went over some of these documents. We'll take a look at those again just to reaffirm this conversation and how deeply this conversation is being had. Because what I can say here is this. We're going to look at this information. Now, I don't know about a complete debt cancellation for the globe or the U.S., but what I can tell you is we're going to have a serious conversation about the debt suspension, a forbearance, if you will, for many countries. And wait till you hear the tune of this forbearance, okay? So, all right, so he urges everyone to extend the time frame of the debt service suspension initiative through the end of 21 and commit to give the initiative as broad a scope as possible. We've made a great deal of progress in the DSSI in a short period of time, but more needs to be done. They're recognizing the severity of the situation across the globe. Okay, so here we go. This type of broad scope for the DSSI can help achieve large benefits for the poorest countries. To give a rough quantification, borrowing countries participating in DSSI have identified $8.4 billion in eligible savings in their 2020 debt service payments, but data provided by the G20 by creditors have identified only $5 billion in debt service deferrals, a $3.4 billion gap in shortfall of debt relief. Not exactly pocket change. But hey, we're talking about the globe. The number could be worse, right? So let's keep going down here. All right, so now debt reduction with immediate steps, longer suspension of debt payments, a DSSI scope that includes more debt and more official bilateral creditors, participation by commercial creditors, and the World Bank's large positive net flows. Many of the poorest countries won't be able to make the resulting debt burden sustainable in the medium term. The economic repercussions from the pandemic are expected to inflict lasting scars on the growth through lower investment, erosion of human capital, and retreat from global trade and supply linkages. Now, I urge the G20 to open the door to consultations about debt overhang itself and effective ways to reduce the net present value of both official bilateral and commercial debt for the poorest countries. Now, it's important to note here as we move through this stuff that, you know, what they're really addressing here is, think about debt. All right, somebody's the debtor and somebody's the debtee, right? If you are holding someone's debt, that's where the problem is. The problem isn't as simple as country A can't pay the bills, so we're just going to excuse them because country A has borrowed the money from somebody, like lender one, right? Well, lender one needs to be made whole. How does that happen? It either has to happen by a larger creditor coming in and buying the debt from the holder and making them whole, or you're going to refinance or restructure the debt that is existing between the two entities. And if you do that, we're looking at more like a forbearance situation where there is either it is going to halt, or as you hear in some of this stuff that we talked about already, where they try to keep a positive net flow coming in, although it might not be the full balance of what is due, just to keep the water running to the actual holder of the debt. This is very real. This is a global conversation about a lot of countries and the shape that they're in right now. Okay, let's keep this going. So then you do debt transparency here, and I'm just taking you through these sections. The substantial resistance to this degree of transparency because many parts of the current system rely on asymmetric information where one party or another takes advantage as the contract is written. Pay attention to that part. The cycle is hard to break, and there is noticeable reluctance of creditors and debtors to go in the direction of balanced debt resolutions and transparency of debt and investment contracts. Balancing the built-in protection of vested interest will be hard, but it is critical for better development outcomes. In conclusion, the situation in developing countries is increasingly desperate. Time is short. We need to take action quickly on debt suspension, debt reduction, and debt resolution mechanisms, and debt transparency. Well, how about that for a call to action? This is David Malpass from the World Bank. This is not a YouTuber, not a podcaster, not somebody who believes in conspiracy theories. If you want to see what a debt cancellation, debt forgiveness, debt suspension looks like, well, this is it. You don't need to look at a conspiracy theory. They're doing it. Now, what stage are they in of doing it, implementing this? Well, they're in the stage of suspension of debt to a great degree, right? A forbearance, if you will. What I find interesting is he really addresses the situation here is where, because many parts of the current system rely on asymmetric information where one party or another take advantage as the contract is written. Basically saying when the contract favors the creditor or even the debtor to bail on the debt, or what happens in the creditor and what they get if the debtor bails on the debt, this causes a gridlock, because maybe a situation where the creditor goes, no, I want to take the possessions that were put forward to be able to satisfy that debt because that was our contract. I get A, B, C, 1, 2, 3 if they don't pay the debt, right? Or maybe the contract is written where the debtor is saying, hey, we're better in this situation to default. And they can have ABC 1, 2, 3 because I want out from underneath of this thing. And there's your gridlock right there. And what it causes is the conversation that we're having, not just on YouTube, but at the level of the World Bank and the G20 and the finance ministers. Let's keep going. So again, this supported by what we covered last week, a letter from the World Council of Churches to the finance ministers of the Central Bank of Governors of the group of the G20. This was them, and they are begging for a debt cancellation. It is not as simple as just a debt suspension. They basically are saying, yeah, we got the debt suspension, but this needs to go further, right? That's where they're at. And it is quite impressive. And there's another letter that I've shared also with all the signatures from all the different faith leaders around the world. It's pretty remarkable. And let's go here. And we covered this last week as well, where they talk about the DSSI, which is the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative. It's an initiative. This is, look how recent these documents are. July 18th, July 20. I mean, this is where we're at here, right? Collectively, all of these entities, these firms that are involved with the Committee on Sovereign Risk Management, collectively, these firms represent $45 trillion in assets under management. We have some serious people looking at this stuff, right? So I'm not going to go back over this document. I'm just tying all of this in for you guys to realize that at this point, you have the faith leaders of the world who are boots on the ground and see the poorest of poorest effects happening to humans and mankind all over the planet, begging for debt cancellation to alleviate the pain of what's going on in the pandemic. Then we come on to here, and now I want to remind everybody that July 20th, 21st, today and tomorrow, is the 4th Digital Economy Task Force virtual meeting with the G20. We also have tomorrow the vote on Judy Shelton here domestically in the United States. We also have the rule going into effect for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that considers XRP a solution to the new effect of the rule to be able to see the cost of your remittance before it actually takes place. They see XRP as a currency, a virtual currency, and a solution to the system. So keep that in mind. Here is a communique from the G20 finance minister. Shout out to Michael C. July 18th, just a couple days ago. And we'll go to sigh of relief. I'm not going to read this whole thing, right? Sigh of relief. Okay, so here we go. Section 6. We welcome the progress achieved under the Debt Service Suspension Initiative. As of July 2020, 42 countries have requested benefits of the DSSI amounting to the estimated USD 5.3 billion of 2020 debt service to be deferred. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank Group have proposed a fiscal monitoring framework and process to strengthen the quality of consistency, debt data, and improve debt disclosure. to provide maximum support to DSSI eligible countries. We will continue closely coordinate in these implementation. All official bilateral creditors should implement these initiatives fully and transparent manner. While protecting their current ratings and low cost of funding, multilateral development banks, known as MDBs, are encouraged to go further on their collective efforts in supporting the DSSI, including through providing DSSI eligible countries with net positive financial flows over the suspension period. So in other words, if they can pay the debt, we want them to, right? Let's keep the water running where we can keep the water running. But if they need to be in a suspension period, let's get that too. So you can see that, look, I mean, this is what's the current conversation as of 2 days ago here at the G20. Now, I know a lot of people have been calling for a NESARA, GESARA, which is a national dismissing cancellation of the debt, as well as a global cancellation of debt. Hey, maybe we grow into that, because this is a huge problem. And I'll tell you something, going through this, you can see clearly how big the problem really is. Let me, if I can just get to one other spot here that I wanted to show you. I'm not going to go through this whole document, although it's quite compelling. Let me see here. Okay, here's some numbers right here and some good information. Let's just finish it out right here. So, okay, well, 1 second. Maybe it's the next one I want. There's so much information in these documents, I'll tell you this. It's just remarkable. You can hear the depth of the conversation from what we're talking about here. Okay, let's go with this. The IMF, WB, World Bank have provided 3 updated reports to International Financial Architectural Working Group, the IFA, or implementation of the DSSI. The IMF and WB have developed fiscal monitoring framework to ensure additional fiscal space created by the DSSI is used to mitigate the social, health, or economic impacts of the crisis. The IMF and the World Bank have developed proposal for debt data reconciliation to promote full disclosure of public debt. The Institute of Finance developed terms of reference to voluntary private sector participation in debt service suspension initiative as a toolkit for the DSI eligible sovereign borrowers that request debt service suspension from their private creditors. Again, remember when I talked about somebody's holding the debt. Now you either have to make them whole, or you're going to have to get them to work with you to refinance the debt or restructure the debt agreement, right? The IFF has prepared draft waiver for cross-default clauses in commercial debt contracts in relation to requests of the DSSI and official bilateral loans. The IFF provide a progress note on the private creditors' DSI implementation status. That's where we are. So, look, at the end of the day, the IMF, the World Bank, in a lot of instances, come in and will buy up the creditor's debt, the bondholders of the debt, and then restructure, refinance a deal for these poorest countries. And they usually get bonds in SDR, and they'll work out a restructure for them. All I want to do in this video is just make you guys aware of the fact that, look, this is David Malpass from the World Bank and the G20. These conversations are extremely real, and you can see how deep they are. Have they reached the point of debt cancellation yet? Not that I see at this time. But I will tell you something. I know that they're talking about debt suspension. That's very real. And that's one step away from debt cancellation if this problem continues. What I want you to take away with you is this. Imagine if we do globally get another second wave of this pandemic. Might that move the globe and the G20 and the World Bank into a conversation about debt cancellation at that point? What does all this have to do with cryptocurrency? The world needs a bailout. In the last financial crisis, it was the hedge funds that took a fall. And it was the central banks that bailed them out. Well, now we're in the next crisis, and it's the central banks that need to be bailed out. Only they don't have it. They don't have someone to turn to. In walks XRP. That's right. I really believe that XRP was designed for a moment just like this. And they knew this day would come. Now, did they know it would come exactly in order of these things? No, I'm sure they did. But they knew that this day would come. And there has to be a solution. I believe for liquidity of the world, they need another asset that they can call money. And that's why I believe XRP will be deemed and designated a currency. All right, guys, that's going to do it for me. Hit the like and subscribe. Make sure you share with somebody you know. I'll catch all of you on the next one.